Hello, Namaskar, good afternoon. This is Simran Singh and welcome to NCERT's live interaction. You all are watching this on PMeVIDYA channel number 5, or you might also connect with us through our YouTube channel that you all are well aware of. It is NCERT official. It's around 2 p.m. on your watch and we have brought you a special session of English where we will discuss about an important grammatical aspect of the subject English, well, that is adjectives and description. The entire session will run for half an hour. It is for class 5th. Though if we have audience joining with us from any other class, it would be good to understand this concept. And to make this concept more conducive and easy for all our viewers, we are joined by an expert. Let me introduce her to you. We have with us Ms. Shannon Diaz. Namaskar, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Namaskar.
Welcome to NCERT.
Thank you.
Ma'am is high school teacher, currently serving at Manovikas School, Madgaon, and joined in from South Goa. Viewers, before starting today's session of English, here is slight detailed important information for all of you. If you have any of the queries, feel free to reach out to us in the comment section of NCERT official. All your messages, your feedback, everything is invited in the comment section. Apart from that, please note our mail ID for class 5th. If you want to share your feedback, you have any homework, you have done any of the assignments you want to share for class 5th, the mail ID is dth.class5@ciet.nic.in. Besides, kindly note our contact number that is again on your screen. It is 8800440559. So viewers, all your questions, your queries, your messages and feedback are kindly invited. So Ms. Shannon, let's get started with today's session. So please inform our viewers what all we are going to study under adjectives and description.
Yes, of course. So for today's session, we are going to learn about adjectives and description. Now, first question is usually, what is an adjective? To put it very simply, it is a naming quality of something. Okay, how you would describe something, not what the object is. And it doesn't need to be an object. It can be a person, it can be a place, it can be something that you eat, it can even be a situation. Okay. Now it's very important, not just the kind of things that students choose to describe, but rather how you're describing them. Now, when you're in school from 5th standard right up until college, if you're in a kind of language setting, learning stories and grammar and writing of that sort, you'll always learn various rules. You'll always learn various instructions. There's different types of topics when it comes to grammar, but one of the most important questions I actually ask is I like to ask my students, more than whether they have learnt the lesson. Okay, how are you going to use this grammar topic? Okay, what are you going to use it for? One important thing about language that should be stressed more, that students should stress for themselves: how am I going to use this? Okay, where will I use it? Where will it come in handy? Now, adjectives are something that applies for pretty much every single occasion. Okay, they'll add color to a scene, they'll make something stand out, they'll make people and characters that you write about memorable. As you grow older, from the time when you're in the 5th standard, then 6th standard, and then the 7th, and a little bit older in the high school, you'll have things like letter writing and essay writing. What this adjective does is that it makes your letters and your writing automatically a little bit more interesting. Okay, there's one important rule also for writing also. Don't think about how many marks you're going to get. Think, how can I make what I'm writing more interesting? Okay, it's not about a certain grade level that you achieve, but rather how much are you learning to use? How well are you learning to express yourself? And one of the most important things about writing, according to me, it's not necessarily whether you're grammatically correct, especially when you're very young and you're still learning. More importantly, it's about keeping your writing from being boring. Students will not enjoy, you will not enjoy if a class is not very interesting. So the same way, if your teacher is teaching you something interesting, if you're learning a more interesting way of describing something, which is what adjectives do. Okay, it's going to allow. Yes, adjectives don't need to be in a very large number. Sometimes just the right word to describe something automatically will engage the reader's interest. Now, the reader might be a 5th standard teacher. The reader might be, your boss at your job when you're much older. So this is something, and you cannot learn language overnight. Okay, so everybody here, we think of ourselves, even teachers, we think of ourselves not as educators but learners ourselves. Okay, because that's one way that a student is also going to learn. So we'll begin with one of a good example actually for very nice adjectives that I've always come across. There's this story by a famous writer, okay, The Grinch, okay, by a children's writer named Dr. Seuss. Okay, if you look at this one phrase, it's basically about this character. It's a pretty popular movie also. He doesn't enjoy Christmas very much, but at the end he makes sure, in spite of all the wrong that he's done, that he's going to ensure that everybody has a good time. If you look at the statement, now you listen to me, young lady, even if we are horribly mangled, there'll be no sad faces on Christmas. One of my favorite adjectives here is the word mangled. Okay, it describes something that's badly damaged, especially as a result of being torn or twisted. So you can see how sometimes an adjective can even just be used to inject humor into a situation. Okay, automatically this sentence seems sentence is something that is more interesting. That's something interesting to look at, something interesting to read. Okay, we'll go to our next slide. And again, I like to give examples of adjectives written in popular writing. Okay, one way to always learn, and I always say this for most of my classes, and general advice for improving on writing also. If you want to be a good writer, you should first be a good reader. Okay, so unless you're reading quite a bit and reading different types of books, reading books for a student of a 5th standard level also very important. There's plenty of books that are illustrated that are not picture books. Books written by authors like Roald Dahl, and also you have good writing here that is also not very complicated. That's the other thing about good writing also. It need not be very complicated. One of the other things about our section today is I will show you, especially in this particular instance, in this particular phrase, how a single well-placed adjective makes things very interesting. An adjective we discussed also, it's just a naming quality. And this is a extract from the novel Matilda by Roald Dahl. And this is a quote by the young girl who is the main character in the story. The books transported her new worlds and introduced her to amazing people who lived exciting lives. So already just two well-placed adjectives, they automatically talk about the quality of what reading brings to this girl's life. Automatically, it engages the person who is reading it, and they're not very big adjectives also. They're not complicated words. We hear people describe things as amazing and exciting. So why not incorporate that into your writing also? You may have heard, even when you're watching cricket or football matches, you may have heard commentators describing it as an exciting occasion. So of course, by all means, whenever something that's used, incorporate it into your own writing. Okay, like for example, here you've automatically got two words: amazing and exciting people who live exciting lives. Okay? You've got something very special here in a sentence like this. And we'll go to a second quote from this text also. Never do anything by halves if you want to get away with it. Be outrageous. Okay, go the whole hog. Make sure everything you do is completely crazy. It's unbelievable. Okay, so you have here adjectives with a little bit more emphasis. Something outrageous, the word outrageous indicating something almost unbelievable. So you have a small amount of excitement in phrases like this, amazing and exciting, and something of a great deal more intensity with words like outrageous and unbelievable. And that's the other thing about using an adjective. It doesn't just describe, for example, something that might be nice, but when you want to describe something as better than just nice, when you want to describe something as very impactful, as having a much bigger impact than just being pleasant, that's what an adjective will do for your writing. It will make an impact. And that's the most important thing about writing. Not necessarily that you use every single big word that you know, but you have a few well-placed words here and there. They automatically will make a sentence more interesting. Okay, now since one of my most important things for students is always thinking not what is the grammar topic and what is the grammatical rule. How is it used? Okay. One important writing exercise that I think most people should do. Whenever you use an adjective, it is essentially just a naming quality. Think of the kind of adjective that you would use to describe yourself, okay, whether negative or positive. Or, think about the kind of qualities that a friend has, a family member has, a sibling has, maybe even your pet dog. They can be loyal, they can be trustworthy, honest in some way. These are just qualities that people and things embody. But don't just think of something as good and bad. Think of them in detail. Okay? For example, as a person, you might be warm-hearted, sensitive, sweet, thoughtful, honest, and sincere. These are all good ways of describing someone. They don't just say that a person is a good person. They talk about the person's individual qualities. What are all the good things that are good about a person? And you need not limit yourself to just the ones that we've learned on screen. I've just got a few on screen here so you can see what the way to describe someone. If you're being a little bit more honest, maybe you can describe yourself as a little bit lazy. These are also things that are very valid to learn about a person. Okay? So when you're describing yourself, think about the various adjectives you would use when describing yourself. You may, and where something like this may come in handy, you may have to introduce yourself to a new class. You may have to introduce yourself in front of your classmates. Okay, so what do you think? So the one way to go about this is to think of some of the best adjectives that would be good at describing you. That you are warm-hearted, that you are thoughtful, that you are sincere. All of these things create this great deal of impact. They make you think. They make a person think about something, not only in terms of something pleasant, but it engages in what are the details of that person's behavior, the details of that person's personality. Okay. Now, I've also got for you here a few ways that the adjectives are used in a sentence. Okay. Whenever you're learning vocabulary, and this is always an important
Ma'am,
thing.
here I have a small question for you.
Yes, of course.
Well, it is, could we use more than one adjective for a single subject in a sentence?
More than one adjective for a single subject? Yes, of course, because you can see here in this second sentence, my best friend is a sweet and sensitive girl who always thinks of others. I would also advise though is that sometimes not to use too many. There's no such rule that says you have to use only one or only two adjectives in a sentence. But when it becomes hard to follow, then maybe you're writing a little bit too much. For example, this sentence, my best friend is a sweet and sensitive girl who always thinks of others. It's a very neat way that the sentence is written. Okay?
Yeah.
And sensitive. But if you say my best friend is a sweet, sensitive girl who is very talented, who can also sometimes be very lazy, that becomes too much. A good rule is not to think about whether to use one or two, but how can I spread out my adjectives in a paragraph in a way that it is easy to follow. Okay, that's another important thing about writing also. Most people assume that you need to write long, complicated lines of text. A good way to know if you are learning something as a reader also is if you can simplify what you're thinking in very short phrases. And sometimes that simplification means you don't need to describe too much in detail, but a few well-placed adjectives, one or two, automatically makes your writing more interesting. Now, in this slide, you can see that it's not so much about how many adjectives are used, but more like where they're placed. Okay? For example, one of the adjectives that we learned in the earlier slide, we're going to talk about it in a sentence. I've always been a very warm-hearted person. It describes a quality. You don't need to say that you're a nice person. Sometimes that word nice gets used very often, but it's often, very inadequate also. It's not enough. Okay, nice describes something very neutral sometimes, not necessarily a quality. What is it that's nice about you? You're a very warm-hearted person. Okay, my best friend is a sweet and sensitive girl who always thinks of others. Automatically, you're describing a person's individual qualities. Okay, and in this last sentence, with honest and sincere, you don't need to just use one adjective. You can see that there's more than one used. His actions have always been honest and sincere, even though he could have cheated on the test. So you can see it's not about how many adjectives you use necessarily sometimes, more like where they are placed, where can they make the most amount of impact. Okay, this is actually one of my favorite places to talk about description and using an adjective. And sometimes I've noticed with students, this is where you might fall short. Okay, so what we've got here on screen are a few words to describe a meal. Okay, usually when people describe a meal, this is just the immediate words that come to mind. They think of it in terms of things like sweet, sour, salty, spicy. But there's ways to describe something as delicious without just using that word. So you can use a word like tasty, mouth-watering, yummy, scrumptious, ways to describe a meal. What you have here is an indication that something is not just tasty, but in what are the ways that it's tasty? Is it just something that you enjoy eating, or is there something more that you can write about this? Now, we've got a few sentences here. The exercise here is I want you to think about which of these phrases, which of the words, which of the adjectives used sounds best. Okay, which of the adjectives sounds better than the other. And sometimes, that is also a quality of writing, just deciding which word sounds better than something else. You have here, my mother always prepares something tasty for lunch, an adjective. My mother always prepares something nice for lunch. Automatically, when you're talking about a meal, you have a word like tasty, which automatically sounds better because it talks about the taste of the food, the flavor, okay, all those kinds of things. Something nice for lunch doesn't really indicate the experience. It may only talk about a pleasant feeling. But when you use a word like tasty instead, you have almost like an experience that you're describing. And again, that's also one of the important things about an adjective. It doesn't just give details of a person, a situation, or an event. It gives you a kind of, it gives you the experience itself also of experiencing that same thing that a person is writing about. Now, if you look at the second example of sentences, that shop sells the best sweets in the whole market. Okay, and this is describing something as best is also an adjective. But if you think about which one sounds better, that shop sells the most mouth-watering sweets in the whole market.
Well, if I would have been the student of class 5th, I'll choose the second sentence. That is mouth-watering sweets in the whole market.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yes, you are. And there's a very important reason that you're correct also. It's because automatically the second sentence, it draws you in. It makes you more interesting. When you say something is the best, you could conceivably be talking about anything. You might be the best runner in the class and all. But when you say something that you've eaten is described as mouth-watering, it is engaging. It creates a impression in the person who is reading it. You can also make out that it has created an impression on the person who has perhaps experienced this also. Automatically, it creates this more, it creates a kind of depth that is not there in just using a word like best. Okay, so you can see again, it's not so much about how many adjectives you know. Do you know which places you can use a very well-placed adjective? Okay, put in the right situation, it can generate interest, it can generate an understanding of an experience that you may not have gone through, but this is something that you may want to experience yourself also. And it's for a little hint also for using something like this in real life, in regular life. Using a few well-placed adjectives like mouth-watering and something scrumptious and delicious. These are phrases that you'll notice a lot of reviewers will use when they're talking about a restaurant, or it may even be a single phrase that you use on an Instagram page. It automatically pulls the person who's reading in. Okay. Now, some of the other things that we're going to talk about in terms of adjectives is describing a hobby as well. Okay. When you describe a hobby, you can describe it, the first word that often comes to people's minds is that it's enjoyable. Okay. A very nice word to use. Okay. And that would be the first thing that you would say about a hobby. But what else can you say about hobbies? Hobbies can be useful hobbies. They can foster your creativity. They can also be very time consuming. Okay, take up a lot of time. That's one thing that people neglect to mention sometimes with hobbies, as enjoyable as it is also. One of the things about a hobby is that it does take up quite a bit of time. Okay, and some hobbies can be expensive and require a little bit more effort. Okay, like for example, here we'll talk about two slightly different hobbies in two different ways. The first one is just a hobby about reading. So reading is a hobby that is both useful and enjoyable. Again, good describing words to talk about reading. The more I read, the more creative I feel I become. Okay, so you've got a use of adjectives in a manner that makes reading more appealing. Okay, now the next one that you can see here. Okay, collecting pressed flowers is very enjoyable. However, it can also be very time consuming. What you have here is an indication that this hobby takes up quite a bit of time. There's something else you can notice with a word like this also. Okay, there's something else you can notice with a word like time consuming. You don't have to write collecting pressed flowers takes up a lot of my time. Okay, you just use a word like time consuming. It indicates a lot more in those two words than you need to mention sometimes in a full sentence. It automatically creates this image of something that is enjoyable, but can also take up a lot of time, that will also require a little bit more effort. And here you're talking about your hobby, not just in terms of how much you enjoy it, but how much of trouble you may take. Okay, how much of trouble a person takes to pursue a hobby like this, how much time, and it's not just how much enjoyment there is, but how much time and effort that you're putting into something that you're very serious about. Okay, and next we have something I'm very fond of doing, of describing a scene. Okay, you may have seen a very beautiful scenery. How would you describe it? Pristine is something that is relatively untouched by human activity, and this is a word that we should also learn quite often in terms of learning about things like conservation, and sometimes leaving the environment as much untouched by our human interaction as possible. Pristine indicates that something is clean, okay, almost untouched in its beauty, and that's something that should be used when describing, particularly when you're talking about scenery. Okay, stunning, beautiful. Okay, this is a very common adjective, but words like these other two, particularly describing a scene that you may not have seen before, like the scene that like the scene that you see in the picture before you. What that will do is it basically creates, again, different images, okay, different ways of describing that same scenario. Okay, now how to use adjective in a holiday story. Now I like to give this slide as an example. Adjective is not used only to describe something positive, but also sometimes to describe a negative experience. Okay, you may be going on a holiday. It will be enjoyable, entertaining, lively, and pleasant. In this case, I wanted to think about going on a holiday for a picnic. Okay, and then you have a few more.
I do understand that here we are discussing a very important element of grammar, but still we are left by the last 5 minutes. So I'll just ensure that the session is run thoroughly and quickly.
Of course. Okay, so we have different ways that we have used adjectives in this phrase. Now, all we need to do for this exercise to think about where the adjectives are used. The picnic was supposed to be a lively, entertaining excursion. However, there were too many fights among our classmates. So it turned into a tiring and unpleasant situation that we did not want to repeat. So you can see how the adjectives are used here, not only to describe something positive, as in these first two sentences, but also to describe something that is not necessarily pleasant. Okay. Now, how to use an adjective in a fantasy story? This is more like a hint. Okay. One of the things that are very common in fantasy stories are talking about things like dragons and monsters. So you can see from this sentence here, by the warm light of the dragon scale, seemed like a shimmering stream of gold coins. How would you describe, for example, the scales on this friendly dragon that you can see in front of you? How else would you describe a mythical monster? As majestic, massive, frightening, spine-chilling. All of these things are going to make your story more interesting. Okay, And towards the end of our slideshow, we're also going to talk about the various degrees. We've talked about it in brief. You may describe something as just beautiful, more beautiful, and the most beautiful, like a jasmine tree. Okay. Now, we'll just talk in brief about a few various ways of using an adjective. You have beautiful, more beautiful, and most beautiful. Big, bigger, biggest. And a very commonly confused adjective. Sometimes people write bad, badder, the baddest. It's actually bad, worse, and the worst. You should also think about the kind of adjectives that you can use in a word like good. Good, better, best. A slight change in the degree of the adjectives automatically sees that something is more interesting, less interesting, or something how it is in comparison to something else. Now, we'll have a short exercise here towards the end. We think about what is the right kind of adjective to use in sentences like this. There's a blank before something, okay? And the only thing you need to do is think about a describing word, okay? There was a dash hippopotamus bathing in the river. You can use any sort of adjective or quality description. Massive, humongous, gigantic, okay? Think about, you can even say, you can even use a quality like mischievous. That would still apply to a situation like this. When he lifted the rock, there remained a dash diamond winking up at him. The noise of the storm was dash and had left them afraid of leaving the house. Now, what sort of qualities can you fill into a blank like this? Okay. Now, I've put in here a few for an example, but you can of course fill in the kind that you would like as well. There was a humongous hippopotamus bathing in the river. And since these two letters do match, there is a little bit of a sense of humor, a slight amusement that you can see from a sentence like this. Okay. When he lifted the rock, there remained a sparkling diamond winking up at him. And here you have an indication of what the diamond looked like. Not just that it was bright and shiny, but sparkling. Okay, automatically creating that image in the reader's head of something that is sparkling and beautiful. Okay. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about, the noise of the storm. Okay, the sound of a storm, the sound of a frightening environmental experience. The noise of the storm was frightening and had left them afraid of leaving the house. Now, this is one of the last things that we need to learn actually about an adjective, is that you keep learning new adjectives. Okay, think about different words to describe a different scenario, and think about not just the adjectives we've learned today, but can we use other ones for the same situation? Like, for example, this hippopotamus, we could have described him as massive.
And one of our viewers have also commented, could we use the word massive or gigantic?
Yes, of course. You can use massive, you can use gigantic, because it indicates the size. That's one of the things you want to do. That's the way the hippopotamus would
brings us to the culmination of this session. Thank you so much for explaining so beautifully and easily to all our viewers about adjectives and description. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to all the viewers who have connected with NCRA for this particular session of English. Stay connected. Our upcoming session is Hindi. Namaskar. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.